Hello, and welcome to This is USG, a video podcast by the universities at Shady Grove. 9 universities, 1 campus, great results. I'm Ann Khademian, Executive Director of the universities at Shady Grove. Montgomery County is a special place in Maryland and in the U.S., the most populous county in the state with over 1 million residents. Montgomery County is also one of the most culturally diverse counties in the country. Montgomery County is the heart of the life sciences, including biotechnology and biosciences on the East Coast, and home to major federal agencies such as the NIH, FDA, NIST, Walter Reed, and more. Tonight, we are honored to have the elected leader of Montgomery County, County Executive Marc Elrich. Marc has dedicated his career as a teacher, as a city council member, as a county council member, and now county executive to advancing more equitable and inclusive education, economic opportunities, housing, small business opportunities, and more. We will learn more this evening about his leadership in a time of crisis during the pandemic and his vision for educational opportunities in the overall strength of Montgomery County as a community. County Executive Elrich, welcome to This is USG.
Hi, and thank you. Nice introduction.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. It's really an honor to have you here. I wonder if we could start with a little bit about how you got here. You have a fascinating path as a teacher through local politics. Tell us a little about why you pursued the county executive role and what that path was like.
It's a long and winding road. When I was younger, I didn't think about politics. I'm a baby boomer. I was born in '49. I moved from D.C. to Montgomery County in about 1960. I went to my first anti-war demonstration in '61. I was at King's March on Washington the following year. So I was doing these things, at the age of 12 and 13. I have always had a sense of social justice. I can't exactly identify the moment when this all got planted in me, but I've been very engaged for a long time. I used to follow all the liberation movements in Africa before I was 10 years old, and just fascinated by the liberation of the countries in Africa that were occurring at that time. I went to the University of Maryland. I was in student government there. I was in SDS. I organized Maryland's first building takeover, fun things like that. And then I, wound up working in the private sector for a while. I was a manager for a corporation. I raised a family, have 4 children, 2 natural and 2 Down syndrome foster kids that I raised. Did that for a while. Got involved in a food co-op in Silver Spring, helped start that. Was very interested in co-ops as kind of an alternate model of economic development. Got involved in tenants' rights issues. That led me to getting involved in the City Council of Tacoma Park. And I had a fateful discussion with some people, community organizers. One time I talked about the importance of electing people who believe the things that people like me believed, rather than hoping that people who didn't believe those things would somehow do the right thing. So I got engaged. I got elected to Tacoma Park Council. I served 19 years there. I ran 4 times for the county council, and I won on my 5th time. And so if anything, I was persistent over those years. I served 12 years at large and been county executive for 2 years. But through all of that, what motivates me is, how do you make the world a better place? What is our ability within the confines of the system we operate in to make sure that, people have the opportunities that everybody should have, that we don't do harm to people, that when we know there are issues in the community where people are, suffering, that we're able to provide the kind of services and support that alleviate that. I'm a big believer in economic opportunity and, particularly small business development. And I have a passion for worker managed businesses where the actual employees are part of the management. And I was a school teacher. I spent 17 years teaching elementary school, and which is something else I did along that path, where I was asking myself, what do you want to do with your life? and what would make a difference. And I wound up substituting in schools, and I got asked if I'd want to become a teacher, and I hadn't actually thought about it at that point. And then I said, well, it would be useful. It would make a difference. I was teaching in a highly impacted school. So all those things kind of meshed together. So I mean, I have a worldview that's kind of driven by a sense of social justice and making this a better place. And I've tried to find opportunities in my life where I could do things like that.
That's an amazing story, Marc. Such a, as you say, a life of persistence and pursuing what you believe in. It sounds like you really lead with your the things you're most passionate about in front of you. Would you say that you have a? I'm curious to hear you talk about your leadership style. What I'm hearing is a lot of persistence and a lot of lifting up the things that you care the most about. How would you describe your style? How would you describe your approach to leadership of a large million-person county?
I think it's different than what some people expect. I mean, for one thing, I bring more of a background than people imagine. I mean, people don't think of me as having a business background. They would be shocked to know that I once developed land. Um, so I've experienced a lot of things from a lot of different angles, and I just am intellectually curious. So I'm not passive. I ask a lot of questions. I expect people to be able to answer them. Uh, I take a lot of meetings because I think it's important for people to be able to hear from me. As one of the things I've tried to do, Montgomery County's a big behemoth. We have over 10,000 employees. I've got a $6 billion budget and more, and it's not necessarily the best run place in the world. And people over the years, when they wanted to do things, just have kind of added things on. And so we do more, but it doesn't mean we really thought really hard about how you go about doing your work. So what I've told people, and I've said this to managers, and I've said this straight to the workforce, is that I want you to imagine that, when you come to work in Montgomery County, that you're on the first day of a job where you know what your purpose is. You're not sure how you're going to go do it. And so as you go about your work, think about, is this the best way to do your work, or could we do this better? And I've tried to encourage people to be liberated about thinking about proposing changes, whether it's a manager who has a different idea for doing something, or whether it's a person, a line worker in one of the departments, that if they see something they think could be done better, I've been encouraging people to step forward. We have one person who's actually run these little institutes for people. They get like 3 months of some short training, and then they pick a problem in their department and they come up with solutions to those problems. I'm trying to, create the sense that we can remake this, that the intentions are good. What people have put together has been put together for the right reasons, but we're in the 21st century now. We have different technology, and the answers that worked in the 80s and 90s aren't necessarily the way you'd approach things today. And I view that as just kind of trying to liberate people, because I always, I know what I know because I listen to other people. There are a lot of folks over, even when I was involved in county government, who would tell me, you could be doing this, you should be thinking about that. And so I kind of respect the collective intelligence, and I try to find a ways to harness it so that everybody's part of shaping how Montgomery County functions. And it's not as didactic as some people are. I do, what's the expression? Fail forward. I encourage people, to try things, and sometimes you'll succeed, sometimes you'll fail, but for sure, if you never try anything, you won't change anything. You won't know what's possible. So I encourage people to try to know what's possible, to not be limited by what somebody told you, or not to come in and say, well, this job is this. This job is this because when it was designed, that's what this needed to be. Different time, different place. What should this be now?
Yeah, that's fascinating, Marc. I think, especially in times we're facing a transition in our economy. We've been dealing with COVID, all of these things. There isn't a lot of certainty in the world. There isn't a lot of ways to lock into things. We don't know what the answers are to a lot of things. So your style really is fascinating, to be giving people, I think you said, to liberate people to try new things. And It's really an interesting approach, and I think I can see that through your whole career. I think as a teacher, probably, and the approach you've been taking to politics and all of that. It's very much kind of empowering people to try new things, and that's wonderful. What a great style! What a great philosophy!
When I was a teacher and I taught elementary school, I tell my kids, if you look at the world around you, it was not always like this. And that you need to understand that it came from something that actually, in pretty much all cases, was worse, and that it's evolved to a better place. But we're not at the end of evolution. And so if you don't like what you see around you, you don't like the circumstances or what's happening in the world, you have as much right to try to change that. But you've got to understand where you came from if you're going to have any sense of what, how you change things and why you change things. So teaching was it was a good place to be having the opportunity to think about that and play with it a little bit.
I think it's also really interesting because we live in a time when we're not very forgiving about failures, or we're not very forgiving about trying something that doesn't work. And I had a colleague years ago when we were reinventing government back in the Clinton years, and he used to say, if we're ever going to successfully reinvent government, we all have to have permission to fail from time to time, or to try things that don't necessarily work. But that's something leaders have to instill, and it sounds like that's something you've been working on to give people the space to try new things, which is wonderful. That's great. Yeah. I wonder if we could move into talking a little bit about the pandemic. You come to office, you've got an agenda, you've got a game plan for what you want to do, and then who anticipated this global pandemic and all the challenges and the consequences of it, this massive crisis to be managed. How did the pandemic shift the way you approached your role as county executive, or did it? And were you able to pursue the same kinds of things during the pandemic that you wanted to? Was there a way to continue to pursue your agenda through the pandemic, or have you had to kind of separate things out and focus on the pandemic and then think separately about these things? How has the pandemic impacted your agenda and the way you approach your role as county executive?
So one thing I probably do fairly well is compartmentalize stuff. I try not to let one thing overwhelm everything I'm dealing with. I did not have an easy start from the beginning. When I walked in, the second day I was in office, I was told I had either a 40 or a $60 million shortfall in the current budget, and we had to start cutting. And by the time we got through that and we're ready to present our budget, which was just in March of that, 4 months after I'm in there, the state says, oh, by the way, your revenues are, I think, $60 million less than we anticipated. So we went through another round of cutting. So my first budget wasn't my budget. My second budget I put together, I brought it over to the council the day that basically the governor said we're shutting down. And the council said that we're just going to do a same services budget. And so nothing new or really different got embraced in that. So I haven't had much of an opportunity to do new and interesting things. And this year, I'm in a budget that's shaped by the lack of revenues created by some of the problems caused by the pandemic. So it's really hard to do everything that I'd like to do. But I've told people, just in terms of how we work on things, is everybody's going to have to deal with this with COVID. You've got to do that. But when COVID is over with, every problem that faced us when we walked in is still going to be staring at us. Nothing went away and nothing really changed. So, whether it's school issues, whether it's economic equity, whether it's social equality, whether it's healthcare inequality, which we've learned about in spades, it is all those problems were still going to be there. So departments continued to work on projects that are post-pandemic. We continued to put together a climate action plan, for which we know we don't have the money to do a bunch of stuff right now, but we have a plan, and there are some things we know we can do. We worked on some really interesting affordable housing initiatives where we got better deals than had been able to get in the past. So I've always tried to focus on everything you're trying to do in the big picture. But then there's COVID, and I'd say COVID has just truly altered my life. It is something that I wake up with every morning. It's every morning. The first stuff I look at is the data on trends in COVID in the region and the county and the country. Um, I was, one of the hardest things is knowing that every decision you make, particularly some of the critical early decisions, determine life and death for people. It is not something I bargain on, where I would be thinking about, you're going to be facing decisions, and those decisions could determine, whether people live or die. And I've been pretty focused on that because I feel like the most important thing I can do is ensure people's safety. We talk about it in a lighter moment. You'd say, maybe I want to be sure that a year from now we're celebrating as many people are around to celebrate it as possible. And so I've taken the task of keeping cases and positivity rates as low as possible. I have followed the advice of my health officials. I have never made a political decision. I've never told them, I thank you very much for your advice, but politics, you just can't do this kind of stuff. I've let them basically tell me, based on their knowledge, what they think makes sense. And I read a lot, and I'm convinced that our health officials are following the best advice that's been available, both locally from people at Hopkins, for example, and nationally from the leaders when they weren't muzzled by the previous president and who are now liberated now to say what they think. So we've really focused on what we do. We understand that the business has been the collateral damage of this. No, businesses didn't do anything wrong. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be open. I get the frustration, and that's why I've been supportive from the beginning for as much federal and state and county aid being able to go to businesses so that they can survive this. And I still think to this day that if this country or this state had shut things down for maybe 4 to 6 weeks in the very beginning, the virus would have burned itself out. It just would. This is one thing that humans completely control, because the virus only survives as long as it has another host to jump to. And when the virus itself is gone from your body, the damages that it's done to you could kill you. Unless that virus finds another host, it dies. And I firmly believe if we had shut things down, except for essential food and stuff like that, for a period of time, we never would have gone through the nightmare that this country's gone through and other countries went through. And you could see that every time somebody thought they had it beaten, that they lighten things up, and then the damn thing would come back again. And so I looked at that. All you got to do is see it once, and then realize every decision to open is, I open a door to an activity. I open the door for the virus to walk through along with that activity. And so I've weighed those decisions. They're not easy. They're not fun. I don't like it when people are really mad. Because their business got shut down and people lost businesses. I don't take any pride in that. I'm not happy about that. I feel bad for them, but I do feel like there's a ton of federal and state assistance and more on the way, and that we should treat it that way. We rebuilt Europe after World War II. Why the hell wouldn't we rebuild our own country? So I'm a big believer that we can minimize the damage in the long run if we've got the will to do that. And in the short run, we should do everything we can to make people safe. So I think I've kind of been the same person. I listen to other people. I ask a lot of questions, but at the end of the day, I know what I don't know. And I know people who know what I don't know. So I'm glad I got brains around me to work with.
It's a very thoughtful approach, and it's the only way to navigate this. There's so many uncertainties and so many things that we don't know about it. And so, your approach is extremely thoughtful and compassionate. I think about that all of the challenges, all of the damage that has been caused by this pandemic, and especially young people, kids in school, especially our our communities, our communities of color, our underrepresented communities have suffered so much through this time. And I know this has been foremost on your mind as well as you've tried to navigate this. But you ended your comments on a point where you said, we rebuilt Europe afterwards. Why can't we rebuild here? And in some instances, I've heard people talk about the possibilities, the opportunities that are available to us now. Sometimes you have to go through a terrible crisis to be able to see what's possible. You can break down all the legacy institutions and you can see things more clearly. So I'm wondering, as we look forward now, as we look at kids who have lost an entire year of education, kids who couldn't sign on because they didn't have internet, kids who had so many other kids at home, the internet couldn't support all of them being on class at the same time, or just food insecurity, housing insecurity, so many things that have been brought to light during this time. As you look forward from Montgomery County, where are the signs of hope that you see coming out of this? What are some of the things that we can do to come out of COVID better and stronger than we were, to address some of these inequities that are the hallmark of your career? How are you thinking about the next steps as we come out of COVID?
So there are a couple of lessons that we learned. I think were more profound than others. One was when we were trying to communicate with people, particularly in the beginning, and reach out to hard to reach communities. We did what we always do. I got a Facebook page. It's translated into Spanish, maybe some stuff. We outreach, yeah, right. Because I'll do a Facebook post. If I get really hip, I'll do something on Instagram. We'll tweet and all that stuff. But no matter what we were doing, we could see in terms of who was getting tested and where the virus was, that people weren't getting the message, and that we weren't testing effectively, we weren't deep enough in the community. We could say we've got programs to help with housing and to help with food, but the uptake of what was needed didn't match what we knew what the need was. So we wound up actually reaching out to community groups. And, I'll say that, Gabe and Nancy, proposed this partnership with the Latino Health Initiative to basically change the way we operate, to put more power and trust in community groups and to focus more on what they knew best about communication, which is better than what we knew. And that's going to be a lasting change because we're going to keep this kind of hub model where we get some services closer to the community and provide. We have these regional service centers, but they got gutted years ago in the recession. And so like one person be running the whole thing, maybe two. We're looking at putting some more resources out in the community so it's easier for the community to reach us. So everybody doesn't have to, take a bus to Picard Drive and go up and down Rockville Pike to, social services on the north end and housing services on the south end. So we're learning that we need to be more nimble and more effective in our communications, and we don't know everything. And that what seems to work for the people who have access does not work for people who don't have access. And so you see this in, not only in the testing, but in this vaccine. I mean, there are people, if this were who gets there first and fastest race, many people in the minority community would be left behind. They don't have access to technology like you described. Either too many kids on a machine during the day, or maybe the internet connections that are so slow through the phone that you really can't effectively use the internet. And so we've done a vaccine program with an equity perspective. We make sure that we're inviting people to get vaccinated from the whole diversity of Montgomery County, not just go down the line and say who clicked first, but making sure that people who clicked in different communities become part of our response. That was really important. It was important to the council. It was important to me. It was important to our health officials who were painfully aware of these inequities. I've talked with the hospitals about having, post-pandemic discussions about healthcare in Montgomery County because they saw it close up and personal. I mean, who was dying and who was coming into the hospitals, is pretty disproportionate. And I think we got a better understanding of, it's hard to say, nobody realized this for the first time, but it has never been as stark. This has a flavor to it and a depth to it that you can't overlook it. I don't have to look at an apartment complex. I don't have to look at a kid's grades. But when you look at death tolls and disease, there is no easy way around dealing with that information. So I think it's made us more aware of our limitations, what we need to do to overcome those limitations, and hopefully, those communities feel better about the relationship of them in government, because at least they had the experience of a government that tried to reach out and tried to do things differently.
Yeah, I really appreciate your response to that idea of innovation, Mark. It's ground in relationships with the community and the role of the community. It's not ground in technology. It's not ground in, it's ground in who you serve, and that's really a great that's has the power to be truly transformative. That's wonderful.
But technology matters. I mean, we're actually working on a project where our IT director is looking at wiring up apartment buildings for internet, where we know we have high concentrations of people who can't afford the internet. So it's so now that we understand the magnitude of what this means, what the schools have shown, it's great to have a computer, but what if you have 4 kids at home taking 4 lessons at the same time? You don't have 4 computers, and you don't have the bandwidth if you did have 4 computers. So we're actually aggressively looking at how we'll bring internet to people who don't have it, and bypass the companies which want a lot of money and the families can't afford, and at least get them access to the internet. So technology plays a role, yeah. But you don't understand what you can't appreciate and don't know until you actually talk to people. Yeah. Technology cannot address that.
Yeah, and I totally agree. Technology has to be part of the solution, but you start with first the relationships and trying to understand, and I think that's really foundational and really important. At the universities at Shady Grove, we've been looking at supporting students, faculty, staff through the pandemic, and what's become so it's always been obvious, but even more obvious is the importance of the pathways that bring students to higher education, and the opportunities for strong K through 12 experience, a connection to a strong community college, a connection to higher education opportunities, and lifelong education opportunities as well at any time in somebody's career or point of need learning or career transition. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, we're laser focused right now on thinking about what is that new educational ecosystem paradigm? What does that look like? How can Shady Grove play a role in strengthening the pathways that bring students from K through 12 up through higher education into great jobs and great careers and things that people are passionate about and want to work on and problems they want to solve? And so we're thinking a lot with our partners in Montgomery College and MCPS about the role we can play in trying to strengthen those pathways. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you see the role of education in Montgomery County, and the future of Montgomery County, and the strength of our community and the strength of our economy.
So I knew from the time I was a kid, there was something special about Montgomery County's educational system, and that it offered lots of opportunity that, for people who were prepared and, came out of backgrounds that lent themselves to success. It was a pretty good system, but we've been dogged by inequality in this system for as soon as people started talking about inequality in the system. Once the county got over integration and the fact it was going to have to deal with it, the results have been unequal. And they've been unequal across, every superintendent, every council, every county executive. It is troubling that the inequality in this has been so very persistent over all these years. But I think one of the things I learned as a teacher that, you get to see close up is the effect of poverty and income on families. You talked about the uncertainty of where food's coming from, the uncertainty of whether you're going to be in that apartment, a month from now. That children get exposed to lots of familial disputes that often center around money and living conditions, and kids aren't prepared to deal with that. They're not things children are supposed to be having to think about, like, where am I going to be sleeping next month? And so I continue to be convinced, if I want to deal with the inequalities that show up in the education system, we need a much more robust pre-K system. We need to help children early on. And we need more family supports. This, like why I supported the minimum wage. People should not, be struggling with basic education, economic issues if you go to work every day. It's ludicrous in a civilized society that on the one hand, we tell people hard work is rewarded. And, if you work hard, you'll succeed, and then pay them so little money that they can't succeed and they can't get ahead. So I think, part of the solution to the educational equation is supporting families and children in a way that they're able to focus on being in school and their kids being educated and not be struggling to manage what is happening in my life. So I just start there because the teacher in me says, you've seen this before. We were doing, most of the interventions in school occurred in, high school. But if you asked somebody, when do you know whether or not a kid's going to make it? I would say, look at their third grade report card. And so I'm intervening in high school for a problem I know is evident in third grade, which means it predates third grade. And yet for years, decades, our focus is at the other end of the spectrum. So I would start early. Starting early, I think, will, build students who are more able to access more of the learning. Another experience I had is that, kids often, if they can't be successful, they choose to fail. Because if you don't try, you can't fail, and failure is bad. And so kids learn, if they're frustrated in learning, sometimes they just tune it out because they don't want to be bad. It's easier to say, I don't care. This doesn't matter to me. I'm just not going to do it. I had moments like that at times when I was younger. And that becomes a handicap. And it's, they're not making adult, well thought out decisions. They're making decisions that come out of their own frustration inside the system. So hopefully, we'll get broader in what we do there. High schools certainly are beginning to transition. There's a combination of high school students taking more college classes than ever before, but also, like Montgomery College being able to offer certificate programs. So I used to say with, pretty much certainty that everybody should go to college for 4 years after high school. And now it's more like maybe what needs to be is K to 14 education. And the last 2 years, 13 and 14, might be either preliminaries for college or the ability to earn certificates in professional fields where you can go out and get work and make decent money. I think we need to do a lot more of that. I know Dr. Smith has been really interested in setting up a school that focuses on computing and developing, programming and analytical skills in computing for high school students. I think that would be a big deal. I'd like to have a very concrete program that identified high school kids, maybe even junior high kids who wanted to be teachers and school psychologists, and not just had the program after school, but talked to their parents and said, look, your kid, we can put them in a program. If they're interested and they want to be a teacher, we can guide them through middle school and high school and, guarantee that if they take these classes in college and become a teacher, we won't charge you for a college education. Again, another thing I saw when I was teaching were parents who didn't want you talking to their children about college because they would say, I'm never going to be able to afford to send my child to college. Don't tell them that's where they're going. I kid you not. And they weren't bad parents and they weren't mean parents. They were just afraid that I would fill the kid with ideas and then they wouldn't be able to deliver. And so let's make sure we can deliver for everybody and that we can get people engaged as early as possible. If students don't think they're finishing high school or they're not going to go beyond high school, and then we don't give them anything in high school that prepares them for work, then we pretty much guarantee they're going to have a real struggle once they leave high school. And again, it's not like anybody suddenly made that decision that high school wouldn't do that. But Montgomery County's been in this mode for a long time where all the emphasis was on college, which is not a bad thing. But if you weren't going to college, there was no alternative path where I could say, well, you're not going to college, but you're going to leave here and you're going to be able to, work in a lab, you're going to be able to do construction, whatever. You'll be able to do something. And that might have been more exciting to kids if instead of tuning out and feeling like, I don't know what I'm going to do, I'm not going to do any of this. Maybe if we had put more effort in making sure that the kids knew that there was something they could do and they could play a role in picking it. And then at the top end of the spectrum where Montgomery College is and you are, we want, the opportunities to, grow into the fields that are really emerging. This, I've talked to you about what I want to do in terms of life sciences and White Flint. I mean, it is really clear that, the two drivers of what a future are going to be inside the computer and inside biology, and that biology and computers are getting married. And it is really clear. I keep reading about this and I keep saying, I said this 2 years ago, but this is where this journey is going. And to the extent that, that your universities drive this ability of people to enter these fields, to see how these fields connect, I think we, take real leadership role in terms of preparing students for what's out there. And then there are a ton of other good things that aren't, biology and computing that, you educate people for. I mean, after all, I'm going to need teachers, I'm going to need social workers, I'll need English professors. Everything that the human being does has worth and value, and we should make it as fulfilling as possible. Yeah. So I'm excited to have, schools in this county that, produce high quality graduates and that are looking to evolve as opposed to, trying to protect the past and seeing yourself as what you've been as opposed to what you can be. And, where you are, with Stu before you and now with you, I think there's a real vision of like, what can we be? Montgomery College has done that in spades. They had programs I had no idea they had until I became executive. So I'm excited about this. I think there are lots of opportunities for partnership.
Yeah, I agree. I think the possibilities, especially of students who are interested in giving back to Montgomery County in some way as teachers, as public servants, whatever that may be, I think there's lots of opportunities for those kinds of partnerships to foster that and to create really strong pathways for students who may not have thought about going to college or thought about going on, but can see a path that maybe wasn't there before. But I really appreciate your focus on adaptive lifelong learning as well. We don't have to follow the legacies of the past. It doesn't have to be a straight pathway towards a straight march according to your age. There can be many pathways to successful careers and opportunities to make a difference in one's community as well. So
multiple jobs. I mean, I just think, I never had anything I wanted to grow up and be, except maybe center fielder for the New York Yankees. But since that wasn't happening and linebacker for the Giants wasn't going to work either, after that, it was like you kind of do what you think is the right thing to do in the moment, and you do it as long as it seems right. And then when you no longer think this is where you want to be, do something else. But that means you've got to be able to develop the kind of flexible skills that you can do more than one thing. And that's what we need to nourish in people.
Yeah. I agree. And I think it has to be done in partnership. I think no one of our partners can do it all. We've got to be able to do it together with business, with the county, with the educational institutions. It's got to be a collaborative. It's got to be a partnership. And I think that's a lesson coming out of COVID for all of us, I think, as well, is that we have to do this together. Well, Marc, I'm gonna take us to the kind of close here and just ask you to reflect a little bit more. You mentioned that the biosciences and computer are going to be married into the future, and picking up on our conversation about education, clearly there's a big talent development need there as well. And Montgomery County is so perfectly situated to be the answer to so many of these future challenges. Just just thinking about the next pandemic, we've got the heart of the biosciences here in Montgomery County, and a lot of opportunity for talent development to really address that as well. As we close out, maybe you could just share a little bit about your vision of how you see the computer and the biosciences working together, and the role you see for talent development and all of that as well. Where do you see this going for Montgomery County? Is this a bit of a glimpse into our economic future and where we're going? What do you think?
I think it's a glimpse of our economic future. I mean, we're not an industrial, county. So any decline isn't caused by, loss of, heavy or even light duty industry. It all is in these kind of intellectual heavy spaces. And these are major spaces. We're probably, four or five, maybe third in life sciences. We're definitely vaccine alley, as they like to call it. And I'll tell you a story about something that impressed me that, it kind of brought it home to me, was when I have a friend who has a science company. He makes these dishes and they got 96 wells in them, and you can put 96 chemicals underneath, say a sheet of cancer cells, and you can see which chemical reacts with the cancer cell and kills it. And you could do this, for thousands and thousands of chemicals. It takes much time to do this and get it right. So if I'm trying to do, a vaccine, and if I understand what the shape of a pore is on a cell that a bacteria or a virus might lock into, and I know what the shape of that is, and I know what atoms are in there, I could screen a group of compounds and just look at the shape of what their structure is to see whether this is going to fit in that lock. Could I put something in there that would attach? Today, you can get these images in a fraction of the time that it used to take to produce these images. You can have catalogs of images and really smart computers matching image of the chemical you're trying to attach or the drug you're trying to attach to the place you're trying to attach it. And you can sort through and determine what might be possible with the speed that was unknown before. And it's partly probably how we got this far down the road toward the vaccine in a year, is they had tools that weren't available before. And these aren't even the best tools. And this isn't even the end of this. This is the beginning of this revolution, not the end of the revolution. And so, what I see is Montgomery County having this opportunity to build on these two great strengths. We're present in computing, we're present in biology. If I need more backup in computing, I've got a quantum center over at the University of Maryland. I mean, the tools are right here. The business investment is here. I've got one of the most educated populations in the country. It's here. I've got one of the most diverse populations in the country, so that whether it's languages, whether it's culture, we have people who can work with each other and kind of melt together in ways a lot of other places can't do. More likely to have what you call human intelligence about other people because we have more experiences with more different humans in this county than many other people have. So we have all the right ingredients. What we need is, in my mind, a concerted effort to put them together. This doesn't happen by accident. Other people will figure out how to, combine the ingredients. We've got the ingredients. We've not done anything deliberate. And so what I'm trying to drive is kind of like this deliberate development of a site on top of a metro, because that's where we know where people want to be, that is sufficiently undeveloped that I can not only put in the scientific spaces and the learning spaces, but I can put in the lifestyle spaces, the things that would make people want to come there more than just a job. Because, lots of places like a downtown, you go to your job and then you walk out your office and you go home. It would be good to have a place where people went to, not just for their jobs, but because it was a good, interesting, stimulating place to be. And for people who work in those jobs to feel like this is a place I want to be. It's not just a place I work, but it's a fun place, interesting place that part of my life gets spent in. And so I'm trying to bring those things together, working with WMATA and working with partners in the business community, and most particularly in the scientific community, to create a space that excels and that brings these things together, nurtures them, sends a signal to people who are looking for partners that we're serious about being partners, that we understand the value of the technology and the living and in the electrons, and that we want to help bring them together. And I think Montgomery County, we certainly provided some major firepower in the midst of this pandemic, and I just think you're just going to see more of it. I talked to some of the scientists up there about what they're working on, and it is absolutely amazing. You can't not be in awe of this.
Yeah, it is very exciting. Cures for HIV, cures for cancer, all kinds of amazing things that are underway. And, here at Shady Grove, we're laser focused on talent development and on, partnering with the industry here, and are eager to work with you to help really expand and grow this great resource and asset for the world here in Montgomery County. So,
I'm glad
well,
you mentioned talent development, because that is what so much of this is about. Companies can't grow if they don't have a supply of talent, and that's what a place we've got to double down on, making sure that no one thinks about going someplace else because they can get fed a better stream of talent than we can feed them here. No reason for us not to be able to play in that space.
yeah. And we'll do it in a rich and robust and diverse and equitable way as well. So, well, County Executive Elrich, thank you so much for your time tonight. This was a wonderful conversation. I learned a lot, and I wish you all the best in your continued leadership of the county. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I wish you the best at the universities. You're in a great position. You bring, I think, the right insights to this job. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Good night.